All right, listeners, welcome back to Sustainability Defined, where Scott and I are here defining sustainability one concept and one bad joke at a time. This is episode 45 on sustainable aquaculture. And listeners, we will share that this episode is sponsored by the Global Salmon Initiative, a leadership initiative focused on improving sustainability in the farmed salmon sector. You know, Scott and I, we are as selective as ever with the topics we choose for each episode, and we love GSI's mission. We're confident that they're making legitimate progress in the push towards a sustainable food system. So, Scott, kick us off. What are we talking about today?
Well, Jay, we've got a nice little outline here for everybody. First, we're going to talk about the state of fisheries globally. Then we'll get into the basics. What is aquaculture? Then we'll talk about when did aquaculture start being used and how prevalent is it today? Fourth, we'll answer, should we feel good about eating farm fish? I bet that's on the mind of many listeners tuning in here. And last, we'll explain what is the Global Salmon Initiative, which we'll dive deep into in the interview. So Jay, state of fisheries globally, tell us about it.
Scott, there is no shortage of stats explaining how vital fish are to our way of life. Here's just a few that we found most telling. One, a UN report found that fish account for almost 17% of the global population's intake of protein. In some coastal and island countries, it can top 70%. Number two, fish provide a vital source of protein for over half of the global population, and some 56 million people worldwide are supported in some way by marine fisheries. And number three, this one, Scott's a little telling. Since 1961, the annual global growth in fish consumption has been twice as high as human population growth, meaning we are consuming more and more fish.
Can't get enough fish here, Jay.
Never, Scott.
So, Jay, even though fish are vital to so many people, like you just explained, we have not generally managed fisheries well. Overfishing, which is when more fish are caught than the species' population can replace through natural reproduction. Excessive bycatch, which is really catching fish you don't mean to catch, and illegal fishing have all gone unchecked in too many places around the world, as has destruction to critical habitat.
That's right, Scott. A World Wildlife Fund report found that between 1970 and 2012, the population of fish in the ocean declined by 50%.
That's amazing.
It's
cut in half.
Remarkable. The decline from these issues is not set to change, Scott, since 70% of the fish population is fully used, overused, or in crisis. That's not great news. This means we're already overfishing or at maximum sustainable yield for most fish in the ocean.
Jay, I'm sorry that climate change is going to add some more negative news here. In addition to human overfishing, climate change is set to be another stressor for fish populations, and here's why. The oceans have absorbed 93% of the heat that is trapped by the greenhouse gases that us humans are pumping into the atmosphere. These higher temperatures in the ocean, they're killing fish directly and the creatures they depend on for food. It's also causing fish species to shift where they live.
And listeners, Scott and I promise we'll get to the good news soon, but this is very important. So, Scott, to go along with your point, for example, in a Detroit Free Press article published in September 2019 on how climate change is transforming where fish in the Great Lakes live, it says in Ontario, warm water loving species such as smallmouth and largemouth bass are making their way into northern lakes. They've never been seen there before. This increased competition could cause stress for the fish that are already living there.
Doesn't matter what kind of mouth you got. If you're a bass, you're moving. Everything that we've talked about so far, Jay, it's all focused on wild fisheries. Not good news there. Considering that by 2030, the world will eat 20% more fish than in 2016, we need an alternative source of this vital protein to alleviate stress on the wild stocks and feed people at the same time. Aquaculture, Jay, is positioned to be that alternative. In fact, World Resources Institute says that as wild fish catches decline, aquaculture production needs to more than double to meet a projected 58% increase in fish consumption between 2010 and 2050. So Jay, aquaculture, this thing that can help meet all this demand for fish, what the heck is it?
Here we go, Scott. Let's turn this ship around. Aquaculture is breeding, raising, and harvesting fish, shellfish, and aquatic plants. In other words, it's farming in the water. When you see the word farmed on fish at your local grocery store, that means the fish was raised via aquaculture and not caught in the wild.
Okay, so farming in the water, there's two main types of aquaculture, Jay, marine and freshwater. Marine is where you farm species that live in the ocean. Think salmon, yellowtail, oysters, and shrimp. Freshwater takes place in ponds or other man-made systems. Freshwater aquaculture typically produces species like catfish and trout.
That's right. And generally there are 4 stages in the aquaculture production chain. Number 1 is hatchery. This is where the breeding of fish, hatching of eggs, and rearing of fish through the early life stages happens. Number 2 is feed mills. Feed mills are where they create the feed that is served to the farmed fish. This feed often contains fish meal and fish oil, which we'll talk about more in a little bit.
What happened to playing Circle of Life before we got into this part, Jay?
We're quickly approaching an iterative food process, Scott, but we'll dive into that later.
Okay, so hatchery, feed mills. Third is farms. Once mature enough, fish go from the hatchery to the farm, where feed from the feed mills is used to grow them to harvest size. Fourth is the processor. So the fish are sent here for processing and packaging, so they can be sent to and sold at food retailers and grocery stores.
So, Scott, aquaculture actually occurs both in water and on land, which I can't say I knew. In the water are mostly net pens, where the fish are contained in a stationary, suspended, or floating system of nets, screens, or pins in open water. They can be along a shore or pier, as well as anchored or floating offshore. On land, Scott, there are a few approaches. Why don't you walk us through them?
Sure. So one is an irrigation ditch or pond system, where you have a ditch or pond with water that contains the fish. Another is an integrated recycling system. I'm so glad we're talking recycling. With these, fish are grown in plastic tanks in a hydroponic greenhouse. Waste from the fish are used to provide nutrients to nearby plants, so you get fish and plants. We love this one, a twofer.
The classic twofer.
Oh, yeah. Third on land is a raceway, which is an artificial channel, typically constructed of concrete, with an inflow and outflow of water to maintain water quality.
All right, Scott, let's ask, when did aquaculture start being used and how prevalent is it today? Well, aquaculture sounds like this new thing, but it's actually quite old. Around 500 BCE, the Romans farmed oysters and fish in Mediterranean lagoons. Freshwater aquaculture goes back even further, another 1,000 years, while farming carp in China for food.
Do you think there were people who were like, oh, is this farmed oysters? Like the Romans? Or like, oh, I want the wild. Like there was like a Whole Foods there to like sell ish, like a Whole Foods at that time. You know what I'm saying?
We found the Colosseum and the Pantheon and everything, but where's the ancient Whole Foods? Why haven't we found that yet?
Yeah, they were labeling their farmed fish.
Artificial breeding was discovered in Germany during the Enlightenment, but it was not until industrialization started killing fish populations that this technology was really developed.
And jumping several centuries, aquaculture has grown quickly in recent years. It's the world's fastest growing food production sector, with 5.8% annual growth since 2010. That's good stock market growth and good aquaculture growth. Today, aquaculture is where we get most of our fish. In 2013, the combination of farm fish and aquatic plants combined surpassed that of capture fisheries. It's estimated that aquaculture will provide 2/3 of all global food fish consumption by 2030.
Scott, you're talking good investments. I might need to make sure our retirement plans have some kind of allocation to aquaculture all of a sudden. But, so one quick fact we found in researching, most aquaculture production today is in Asia. China alone accounts for 62% of aquaculture production. It's just one country.
Jay, I feel like if they were remaking The Graduate, you know how they were like back then, one word, plastics. Today, I think they'd be like one word, aquaculture.
Scott,
it's growing.
I agree. But you're going to have to excuse both me and all the listeners that have not yet seen The Graduate.
But you know that scene, right?
I don't think I know that scene.
Oh my God. Okay.
I know this is the movie that Mrs. Robinson was, or that influenced in some way, right? The song?
Yeah.
Okay, with Dustin
Wow.
Hoffman.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay,
You know
all
some
right,
basics,
right?
but
Okay, let's give me at least like
moving
half
on.
credit. All right, so Scott, you asked us at the top of the show. I know everyone is wondering it, including myself. Should we feel good about eating farmed fish? Well, there are some issues with farmed fish. Let's talk about them. Number one is that there can be a lot of waste excretion from the fish, which can lead
Poop.
to toxic.
We're talking poop.
Thanks, Scott. Which can lead to toxic algae blooms and polluted drinking water if not handled appropriately. Another concern is the use of antibiotics to prevent disease, which could lead to antibiotic-resistant bacteria.
Okay, a third issue is the concern of a spread of disease to wild populations if the fish grown in pens in the ocean escape. A fourth issue is the conversion ratio. This refers to the amount of input, think feed, it takes to get the output of a fully grown fish. In other words, the conversion ratio refers to the amount of wild fish used to feed the farmed fish. And this conversion ratio, it varies by species.
Right. So, Scott, let's drill into that a little bit more. For fish that are predators, they need to be fed fish meal composed of smaller fish and fish oil derived from these fish. As much as 25% of wild-caught fish are used to create fish meal. And 90% of these fish could be eaten directly by humans. So here we kind of have this different processes creeping into each other. Sometimes the fish in the fish meal, such as sardines and anchovies, are themselves overfished in some parts of the world. We have so many moving pieces here, Scott.
Yeah, and this is what causes some people, Jay, to question aquaculture, because it's like, wait, okay, so you're trying to meet the increased demand for fish by growing the fish, but if you're feeding these grown fish more fish than you're growing, isn't this a net loss? Right?
Exactly. Exactly. That's
Right.
where it all boils down to the data that GSI is collecting, which we'll get to in just a minute.
And the alternatives that they're looking into for the feed.
Exactly.
So, and we'll get into that, but ultimately, the environmental impact of aquaculture is dependent upon the species being farmed, the intensity of production, and the location of the farm. So fish farms that are in areas with strong currents that move from time to time tend to avoid any issues with effluent, aka wastewater.
AKA poop.
Now it's you. So it's important the farm fish are in clean water since they will ingest the contaminants in the water and pass that along to the consumer. We don't want that.
We definitely don't want that.
Definitely don't.
Antibiotic use is generally declining, and safe and effective vaccinations are now more common. Still, many developed countries regulate antibiotic use, while its use is looser in some developing countries. And of course, some farms have underwater cameras, I love this one, Scott, to detect any holes in the pen and escapees in the form of fish escaping in their jailbreak white and black striped uniforms. Jump in the crib.
Yeah. I just see the fish like with such guilty faces, like as they escape, getting caught on camera. Okay. In general, the conversion ratio for farm salmon, pretty good, close to 1-to-1. Remember that the conversion ratio refers to the amount of food needed to get that desired output, which is, of course, a healthy fish. This about 1-to-1 ratio for farm fish like salmon is better than other protein sources, such as cattle, at 6.8-to-1. Further, the aquaculture industry is innovating to find alternative options to reduce the amount of wild fish used in the feed. Again, we're going to talk about this in just a bit.
So we arrive at the question, how can you, our dear listener, know how the specific fish you're contemplating buying scores on these metrics? Looking out for certification labels is a great place to start. Here in the US, you'll see BAP for Best Aquaculture Practices.
BAP.
Another is ASC for the Aquaculture for the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, thank you, Scott, which is a marker that those fish have been certified to be responsibly produced.
One place to look up information on whether a certain fish raised or caught a particular way is sustainable is the Monterey Bay Aquarium's Seafood Watch app, because of course there's an app for that. And we love this app. We recommend downloading it. You can type in the type of fish, and then for that fish, it will tell you for a specific location and method of farming, given current conditions, if it's best choice, good alternative, or avoid. There are other guides for you to check out. Environmental Defense Fund, the Safina Center at Stony Brook University, and the Marine Conservation Society all have apps.
Scott, there's an app for that. There's also maybe a BAP for that, back to best aquaculture practices.
Oh my God.
So here we go. Some retailers also do the work for you to make sure their fish are farmed sustainably. For example, Whole Foods, as we recall back to the ancient Roman era, works with the Seafood Watch and the Safina Center to avoid unsustainable seafood. And if you're eating out, you can look for a James Beard Foundation approved restaurant, which looks at the responsible sourcing of all of the restaurant's ingredients, including seafood.
Okay, Jay, and listeners, we are now at the last section of the outline. We're going to dive deep here into the Global Salmon Initiative because the impact of aquaculture is species dependent. So it makes sense we would kind of drill down here into one species. And it's one we all know and many of us love. I can't think of one person that doesn't love salmon, Jay. Do you know anyone? I don't know.
I'm throwing my girlfriend under the bus here, Scott. She doesn't like salmon nor any kind of fish.
Any kind of fish. Well, I think that's the caveat. Some people just don't like fish, period. But I can't think of someone who likes fish and they're like, oh, I don't like salmon, but I like tilapia.
Right. Listeners, if you like fish and claim to dislike salmon, let us know. We need to disprove
I like
this
that. Little social media interaction.
That's right.
Okay.
So, Scott, GSI was launched in 2013 after a group of salmon farming CEOs met to discuss how they could improve their environmental reputation, which, of course, meant improving their environmental performance. They decided that to see real change, it was necessary to break down the barriers within the industry and improve everyone's environmental performance. They recognized that just one laggard could bring down the entire industry's reputation.
So today, the group has 14 members, representing 8 countries and about 50% of the global farm salmon sector. The initiative sets itself apart from the other industry groups in that it is led by the member CEOs, so I guess that means you got the decision makers there, and they believe that by working collaboratively and transparently, they can improve the industry's sustainability performance at speed and at scale.
Scott, salmon is an important one to get right. Salmon aquaculture specifically is the fastest growing food production system in the world, which is really kind of wild. And it makes sense considering, as we mentioned before, most of us that love fish love salmon. Approximately 400,000 tons of salmon are consumed in the U.S. each year. That's like everyone in the U.S., my girlfriend included, getting 2.5 pounds of salmon each year.
She'll just give it to you, though, her share.
Right, so I am getting 5 pounds of salmon each year. Approximately 60% of all of the salmon production is farmed.
Okay, so GSI is working to reduce the impact of all this farmed salmon via 4 work streams that reflect some of what we've already discussed. One is achieving the highest level of environmental and social standards. How's it doing that? Well, GSI members have committed to achieving the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, ASCA, certification across 100% of farms. ASC is an international nonprofit, and to get its certification, a body independent of ASC must certify that a farm has achieved a certain number of points across more than 150 environmental, economic, and social indicators. And then there are regular audits, too. More than 60% of production from GSI farms is ASC certified, so they're on their way to that 100% commitment.
Scott, the second way GSI is working to reduce the impact of farm salmon is by improving biosecurity, meaning fish health and welfare. GSI is working collaboratively to research and innovate the 2 main challenges to fish health: sea lice and the use of antibiotics. Sea lice are a naturally occurring parasite that can harm fish and reduce a farm's productivity, in addition to that bug that gets into your hair. Then, with antibiotics, GSI members transparently report on their use of antibiotics in its annual sustainability report. GSI's data shows that among its members, antibiotic use is declining year on year, and in some cases, farms aren't using any at all. GSI members are also trying to find non-medicinal ways to address sea lice and keep salmon healthy. This is important considering every year about 9.5 million fish die in salmon farms, which is about 20% of the total. A very significant number.
1 in 5. Lice, no joking matter.
No joking
in hair
matter.
Or in the ocean. Okay.
I shouldn't be laughing. Take that back.
No, yeah. So securing sustainable sources of feed ingredients is another thing GSI members are working on because they know they can't continue to use fish meal and fish oil at the levels they have been, especially with that projected industry growth we were talking about. So innovations are needed. With fish oil, GSI wants to find non-marine sources like algae, specialty crops like canola, and insects that can offer the same levels of omega-3s to keep the salmon healthy and maintain the health benefits for consumers. For fish meal, GSI is trying to use more byproducts, which are parts of fish not sold for human consumption, that would otherwise go to waste. So far, the plant-based feeds they've looked at, such as soy, have had limited success because salmon rely on protein-dense fish meal to reach market weight quickly.
In other words, salmon are protein loading to really bulk up like all of our bodybuilders here on land.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, all these farms, they have weight rooms.
Scott, what are salmon's like favorite specific workout? Are they doing curls or doing squats?
They're probably doing lunges, Jay, in anticipation of lunging out of that pen, which we don't want them to do.
All right, number 4, as far as the way GSI is reducing salmon impact, is improving industry transparency. Each GSI company reports on several environmental and social indicators in the Gsa Sustainability Report. These indicators include fish mortality, antibiotic use, and sea lice counts. The report is pretty unique in the food sector as it includes data from multiple companies, regions, and years all in one place.
Okay, Jay, so our interview today is with Sophie Ryan, Chief Executive Officer of the Global Salmon Initiative. By the way, Sophie Ryan, is she like Jack Ryan's sister? That's a really cool name. She's been with GSI since the very beginning in 2013 and became the CEO in January 2019. We're going to do a deep dive into GSI and farmed fish, particularly farmed salmon, with Sophie. Let's hear what she's got to say.
All right. All right, listeners, we are joined now by Sophie Ryan, who is the CEO of the Global Salmon Initiative, here to talk with us about sustainable aquaculture. Sophie, thanks so much for joining us.
Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here today to talk to you about seafood and sustainability.
And thank you for taking a break from probably enjoying some deliciously filleted salmon to talk to us about the Global Salmon Initiative. So let's start, Sophie, with how you got into sustainable aquaculture. We see that you started working with GSI in 2012 as part of the secretariat that supported the group. You became director in 2015. At the start of this year, congratulations, became its CEO. And considering your age and then your CEO, Jay, we should probably be asking Sophie for like career advice. Like, how did you get so quickly to such a title? But first, tell us about how you started working in seafood. Were you always interested in it? Was it something you first got exposed to when you were working in communications out of college?
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had some good tips for you, but I'll think on that one and come back to you. I wish I could say it was always a dream of mine to work in seafood. And whilst I like to think of myself as an ocean person, I have to admit that wasn't the case really. But, you know, the notion of working in seafood was something that actually happened rather naturally. I studied geography at university or college, as you might say, and enjoyed how geography was really at the core of many important concepts. You know, it brings together climate, people, food, development, oceans, and sustainability. And when the opportunity to work in aquaculture and with GSI came up, it seemed like a logical fit considering it sits at the intercept of all these issues. And, you know, for me, what really attracted me to the role was that the fact it was centered on sustainability and environmental improvements gave me a sense of purpose, that I was kind of working on the right side of a very important story. You know, how are we going to produce enough food, enough fish in a sustainable way?
No small question, that's for sure. So, Sophie, as we get started, we have to know what your favorite type of fish is to eat. And if it's not salmon, we're not going to tell anybody.
Are you going to believe me if I do say it's salmon though?
Well, if you say salmon, you have to tell us how you like it prepared.
Well, it definitely is salmon, and I promise I'm not even lying. And I like it prepared just very simply cooked with a bit of lemon, I have to say.
That's nice.
Oh God, yours the best. But salmon really is a really easy option to choose, isn't it? It's pretty simple, it's easy to cook, it's healthy, and as someone who doesn't eat meat, it's actually a great choice to have. And obviously, I'm quite lucky living here in Vancouver, BC, that we have such great local fish, both farmed and wild salmon available. So I'm pretty spoiled for choice when I go to the supermarkets these times.
Okay, and I imagine a lot of listeners, they like salmon too, and we went over aquaculture and GSI generally in the intro, and I imagine people sort of have their own conceptions as well about aquaculture. So as someone who works in GSI and in this industry, are there any common misconceptions about GSI or farm salmon generally you just kind of want to off the bat address for the listeners?
Yeah, God, you hear so many old myths that were true many, many years ago, because the industry is still fairly young. Like, even though aquaculture has been around, for centuries, the actual kind of industry focus of it is still so new. And so when some people ask questions, they're bringing up data which was true 30 or 40 years ago. For example, when we look at the issue of using wild fish in the feed for farm salmon, 30 years ago, it took kind of 3 fish to produce one salmon, which obviously isn't an ideal situation you want, because, those wild fish could have been used to be eaten just straight as they were, or, been left in the ocean. And so that was an issue which, the industry really had to address. And actually, I'm really pleased to know that today that number is 1 to 1, or even, we're going down below that with some of the new innovations that are coming up. And so I guess some of those misperceptions, they're not misperceptions, they're just based on data that isn't true anymore. And so I guess I always try and share some of the latest information and the latest data, which I think shows the industry in a much more honest position of where it is today.
And Sophie, that's a great point. I might want to toss one other, maybe not misconception, but thought process that consumers might have when they're looking to go and buy fish from the store. So one of the things we talked about in the intro was if listeners should feel good about purchasing farmed fish in the first place. Because I know there might be this conception among consumers of, okay, well, here's a farmed piece of salmon, but I know that maybe I value organic things and natural ways to harvest food, so wild might be better. The question for you is, should our listeners always feel good about purchasing farmed salmon specifically, or are there certain things they should look for or purchase in a certain way in order to reduce their impact?
We really need to consider that really there's no food which doesn't have an impact. When we think about crops, animals or fish, there's always an impact, whether it's land use, water use, resource use, or greenhouse gas emissions. But the science today is showing us that aquaculture has a lower impact and a lower environmental footprint than many of the land-based animal options. So perhaps when you're in the store and you're deciding what to buy, whether it's the chicken, beef, pork, or the seafood or the farmed salmon, when you think about those aspects, I think you can feel good that farmed salmon is a good choice and something you can feel good about. But of course, when you're looking at any type of farming, there's always different methods of production which need to be considered. And as a consumer, walking down the supermarket aisles, it can be pretty hard to know what are the best options, even if you've got that kind of mindset on looking for what does have minimal environmental impact. It's still pretty hard to know what are the right choices. So when you ask, what can the consumer look for, or what can, we be conscious of? I think for me, it's really important we start to look for some of the widely recognized certification schemes. So in aquaculture, we have the Aquaculture Stewardship Council, or ASC. It's a bit of a mouthful. And for wild fish, MSC, the Marine Stewardship Council. And I think when we start to look for those logos on fish, we kind of get an additional element of assurance that what we're buying has been certified to the highest standards. It's been produced in a way which is environmentally and socially responsible. And so I think if we just take a bit of time to look for those when we're in the store, it can make us, make sure we're making the right choices. It also demonstrates to the store that certified products are the preference. And that, I think, can be something we can go away and feel pretty good about.
And Sophie, a quick follow-up, because that makes a lot of sense, but if you can put yourself in the position of the consumer looking at farm salmon on one side and wild salmon on the other, it sounds like the argument could be made that, as we mentioned earlier, from this World Wildlife Fund report, that 70% of the fish population is fully used, overused, or in crisis. On the other hand, we have farm salmon, which comes from hopefully a sustainable aquaculture model where inputs and outputs are monitored very closely. Is that the argument you would make to a consumer as far as maybe I might think I should buy wild salmon, but in reality, it might be more responsible for me to go the farmed route? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does make sense. And I do think that is the way, we're heading these days. But I think there are still two really important considerations we need to have in mind. The first is nutrition. Global research has shown that there's no significant differences between wild or farmed in terms of health benefits. Mm-hmm. So when we think of that on its own, I think both are very good options. But as you said, when we start to add in this second consideration around sustainability, as you said, in an ideal world, we'd all eat wild fish, but there really quite simply just isn't sufficient resources for us to do that now. And as global populations grow and demand grows, we simply can't keep taking fish from the oceans at the rate we have done. And so when we start considering these two factors together, I think aquaculture has a really important role to play in ensuring we have a healthy option and a sustainable long-term option too.
So Sophie, let's move from the purchasing behaviors now over to the Global Salmon Initiative itself. So Scott and I talked at the top of the show about how the members of GSI have come together to improve the entire industry. Can you talk to us about why in this industry specifically you believe collaboration to be so important in driving change and what benefits it offers the members of GSI?
Yeah, this is the topic that gets me super excited. In GSI, we identified a number of key areas that related to environmental performance and sustainability, where the companies believe that by working together or collaboratively, they could have greater impact at scale, so more regions, more of the industry included, but at a faster rate than working individually. So, when it comes to think about environmental improvements, collaboration can really be a significant driver of change. Working one company at a time or working on a smaller scale, perhaps just, one region at a time, you can address some of the challenges, but it won't deliver the real change or the significant change that, the food system really needs these days. We really need to see a significant shift in the way we're doing things. So in a situation like GSI, where we bring together 50% of the industry, we're bringing together all that industry experience, that expertise, and that knowledge in some of the key areas like fish welfare or like implementing the certification like ASC we mentioned earlier. And we're bringing together all of those people, those minds on those key topics. And that, makes us better positioned to identify the areas for improvement and then find the solutions and actually implement them, which, wouldn't be able to happen at speed and at scale if every company was working independently.
And do you have a story of how that played out? In this one aspect of aquaculture, because we were all working together, we identified this solution and then tested it and scaled it out.
Oh yeah, which one shall I pick?
Ooh.
I know. I'm going to choose an example from an area called biosecurity or fish welfare or health. And what we did was we collected all of the best practices from all of the companies. So all of the members and all of the different regions started to put together all of their best practices in regard to fish welfare. And that included collecting all of the data on what they were doing, what challenges they were seeing, how they were treating the fish. And by pulling all that data together, we were able to go, okay, this company is seeing this result, this company is seeing this. Why are things so different between the companies? And, how can we change that? How can we improve it? Yeah. And just by creating a platform where the companies could discuss things and share things and, be based on real farm data, we were able to go, okay, why don't we try this? Or why don't we implement that? And then, we start to see change. And if things don't change, then, we'll change track and we'll try something else. But since we've been working in this collaborative field, we've seen some significant progress in the use of non-medicinal approaches to biosecurity, which means instead of using medicines or vaccines to treat the fish, we'll actually just focus on some pretty cool ways of setting up the pens in the ocean to stop sea lice coming in, or the companies working in neighborhood farming systems, so they're working together on biosecurity issues rather than working alone. And I think we've seen such progress in the past 6 years, and there's still a lot to be done, but just creating a space where those technical representatives from each of the companies have a place to discuss those issues has been really beneficial for all of the members.
Right. And if one has, say, a solution to sea lice, they're not going to be like, well, I'm going to hold on to it because now I have this competitive advantage. They'll share that.
It sounds like.
It is. And isn't that, it's quite a crazy thing actually for competitors to be able to do that. But what I think the members of GSI see, is that they need to change and the industry needs to improve at a huge scale. And they're simply not going to be able to do that if they only work independently. And by sharing that new technology or that new approach to sea lice, they actually help the whole industry improve, which will help them improve as well. So it's taking out that level of competition on areas related to environmental improvements, and knowing and recognizing that by working together, they'll actually see much bigger progress, internationally than just working company by company.
So, Sophie, we are familiar with the GSI website and the annual sustainability reports that you all publish on behalf of all of your members, which has a number of different metrics that really give a great window into how you all are viewing and quantifying sustainability. Could you tell us more about your decisions about which metrics to include and your overall strategy with those sustainability reports?
Oh my gosh, this is probably one of the trickiest conversations we had when we launched GSI. Asking 14 companies to put all of their data up on a public website was not an easy ask or an easy thing to agree, let's say. But the members knew that transparency was an issue, and that to rectify that and to show to our stakeholders, well, actually to ourselves, that we were committed to change, to each other, to hold each other accountable, and to our stakeholders that we were committed to change.
Accountability buddies?
Exactly, yeah. By holding ourselves accountable and letting others hold us accountable to some of these promises and commitments we made when GSI launched. We knew we would have to put some measurable metrics out there. And that's where the GSI Sustainability Report came from. And after lots of decision and discussion on what metrics should go up there and how often we should report and how detailed should it be, we had various discussions with many of our stakeholders, some of the environmental groups and some of the policy groups, on what they felt were the most important issues. And from those conversations, we identified 14, which include some of the key, hot topics in the industry, like escapes, use of antibiotics, biosecurity issues, all kinds of factors in there, and decided to put all of that metric up on the website for each company in each region and update that yearly. And that now gives us, a fresh place to start from of where the industry is at, and aligning that with ASC allows us to see where we want to go. And so it's really created a new starting point for the industry on where it wants to be in terms of its environmental performance.
We have that right here. GSI represents approximately 50% of the global farmed salmon sector. And those 14 members with operations covering 8 countries have demonstrated the importance of improving environmental performance, as we've been talking about. Why? This is a tough question, but I'm curious to get your thoughts on it. Why do you think the whole industry is not yet involved with GSI? And is your plan one day for the entire industry to be members?
I mean, firstly, 50% of a global sector in a sustainability initiative like GSI is pretty groundbreaking, I have to say. And when, we have 14 members now in 8 different regions, but when we began in 2013, we just had 5. So I'd say we've already grown quite a bit. But when we consider the rest of the industry, the group is, of course, open to any company who wants to join and is able to commit to the principles and commitment of membership. So working together to improve transparency and obviously on sustainability improvements. But what sets GSI apart from some other industry associations is that we won't be driven by the lowest common denominator. Mm-hmm. And we've set the membership, the bar's membership high, and we're driven by the change needed. And so you really have to be pretty motivated and pretty able to work to what we've set as our goals.
Like ASC certification for everything. I mean, that's tough.
Exactly. We're committed to 100% ASC across all of our farms. And, a couple of years ago, there was no salmon farm ASC certified. But in the 6 years of GSI, we've gone from 0% certified to 60% of our production certified.
Wow.
So, we're not asking for little changes here. And so for a lot of companies, being a GSI member takes a lot of resources, not just, there's a cost involved, but mainly it's the time and the effort of the companies. And in, a food production sector, most companies are just trying to get by and just trying to survive. And so we definitely hope we'll get a few more members in, but we're just focused on the change, and, companies will come in when the time is right for them.
There's also the hardcore reporting requirement. So you talk about this impressive increase in ASC certification, and you all at the same time report out on a variety of metrics. So are there any areas that you've seen, and you are public about this, given on that data, where you're having a tougher time? And can you talk to us about some of those areas where you all are trying to work together to overcome it, but you haven't quite been able to do that?
And one of the particular areas where they were, not seeing the figures they perhaps wanted to see was in regard to sea lice management. And sea lice is an issue which continues to challenge the industry. And despite continuing efforts, they still see some issues with some of the numbers there. But by putting all of the company's data onto the report, we were able to, start to have discussions based on real data. We could see some of the differences between the companies, between the different regions, and start to discuss, what factors are at play, what different methods are you using, what different methods are we using, and seeing what's working, and then trying different approaches and new approaches to see if we could start to see some improvements in those numbers.
Okay, Sophie, let's start looking ahead now towards the future of farm salmon. So the question is, how advanced, how large can the farm salmon industry get? For example, do you foresee the ability to grow salmon with very little environmental impact to the point where it's very common for us to have salmon with much fewer environmental inputs to get there?
Mm-hmm. Salmon's already the second most consumed seafood globally, but, global demand is...
What's number one?
I think it's shrimp, prawns.
Oh,
really?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's all those shrimp cocktails eaten across America, that's what's driving it. But, as global demand for protein keeps rising, and as we start to consider a changing climate and the additional pressure that's putting on farming systems, I really believe there's a huge potential in aquaculture and salmon farming to grow more. The ocean covers 70% of the world, and yet only 2% of the ocean is currently used to produce food. And, as we discussed earlier, aquaculture has a favorable environmental footprint over some of the other different protein production systems, chicken, beef, or pork. It, doesn't use any land. It has lower greenhouse gas emissions and has a lower feed conversion ratio, which, means it's essentially using fewer resources to produce the food we eat. But of course, even considering these, any growth of the industry will need to be managed responsibly. And which is why it's so important that through groups like GSI, the industry is set around looking at new innovations and looking at changes to get the industry to where it needs to be in the future, so that people can still eat farm salmon and know it's having, minimal environmental impact.
Yeah, and you talk about needing to grow responsibly. So what are some of the areas of innovation you're working on so that that growth is managed and that you continue to grow?
Yeah, and you know what? The rate of innovation in this industry is actually just pretty incredible to see. Even in the short space of time I've been working in the industry and with GSI, the speed at which new innovations are coming into daily practice is really impressive. And actually, one example I can mention is there was an issue we started discussing or working on when GSI first began, which was the use of fish oil in salmon feed. So as you know, the fish oil from marine ingredients or the wild fish is traditionally a key ingredient in salmon feed, as it provides the necessary nutrients for the salmon to be healthy. And of course, provide us as the consumers, the nice added health benefits of a fish rich in omega-3s. But using wild fish to feed farm fish is clearly not an ideal solution. So I think it was around 3 years ago, about 3 years ago now, the GSI started looking into some alternative options. So to replace those wild fish ingredients, we started looking at algal oils or canola crops and even using insects. And we launched a tender to call for some of these suitable innovations, these new options. And
what's a tender? Like a request for proposals or something?
Yeah,
not the dating app.
Well, it kind of is like dating. It's kind of finding, one option isn't working, so let's find something new. But yeah, we put out, a request for a proposal, as you said, or a call to say this was an industry need. We needed some new options, and what other options are out there. And what we saw is that there were some interesting things happening, but there was nothing yet at the scale or the specifications that the industry needed. But if we fast forward to where we are now, so not even 4 years later, there are multiple options on the market. If you were to Google salmon fed on algae oils, that would come up on Google straight away. You'd see there are options there, which, in the space of 4 years to start to change a key ingredient in the feed is just pretty crazy. And so when we look at innovations, it's not just, the scale of innovations that the industry are reviewing, but it's how quickly these are being incorporated into the daily practice. And, the fish feed is just one example of how the industry is shifting. But I know there will be many more that come up in future years, and there'll be, many new innovations incorporated that will make farm salmon and aquaculture continue to be a long-term sustainable option as a food source.
So, Sophie, we now know in much greater detail what the global seafood production system looks like, and of course that seafood is, number one, tasty, and number two, good for us. So if people want to purchase sustainably farmed salmon, what action should they take to help your organization, number one, achieve your sustainability goals, but then also ensure on a larger picture that everyone has access to tasty, sustainable salmon?
As consumers, we have such power in helping drive sustainability improvements, and it's simply by making more conscious purchasing decisions. And, we've discussed a lot around choosing, certified options, but it's just about asking more questions. As I said, at the store or at the restaurant, it's asking, is the seafood certified? If you can't see a logo, asking, is there a certified option? By making these choices and by asking these questions, we're telling people that this is the option we want. We want sustainable, we want responsible choices. And then we're rewarding those farmers who are using those methods. And that will help us drive, sustainable growth. And as you're asking the store for those sustainable options, they'll start pushing the farmers to start producing more sustainable food. So I think it really is just about being more aware, asking, the right questions, and each of us can play a small role in helping drive the industry along a more sustainable path. And that way we can make sure that the salmon we have on our plates in the future is both healthy and sustainable for us.
So you talk about the certification and asking the right questions. So I guess I want to go back to a situation that I bet a lot of people find themselves in. They're not in a Whole Foods that is working hard to make sure that all their seafood is sustainably raised or caught. And they're in a store where there's no label. Maybe the person behind the counter doesn't quite know as much as you'd like them to know. Should they maybe not purchase the farm salmon if they can't get their questions answered? And then by not purchasing, that almost drives like, oh, they didn't purchase, like our numbers are down, we got to get the certified stuff. Is there I guess what I'm getting at, is there a situation where the reality is maybe this farmed salmon or this farmed fish, don't purchase it. It's not quite where it should be, even though GSI members broadly are so committed to this and do produce salmon the right way.
Yeah, and it's a really good question, actually, because I think some of the space can be quite complicated. And, obviously you don't want to make shopping or choosing, the right foods to eat difficult. We don't want to make life even harder for people who are already having to go into a supermarket and face a million decisions of what to buy and what to eat that day. So I think it's a question or a place of asking the right questions, hoping to drive things, in the right direction. And, if there's other options available, then, potentially, yes, choosing not to buy something if you don't believe it comes with the sustainability credentials you're looking for, then perhaps there are other options to buy. But as we kind of discussed a little bit earlier, if it's a case of choosing seafood over, other protein choices, chicken, beef, or pork, aquaculture generally and seafood generally still comes out with a preferential environmental sustainability profile. So I still think that choosing seafood, even if it doesn't perhaps have that certification on there, is still a step in the right direction if you're looking to choose something which is healthy and has a minimal impact on the environment. It's just as that industry starts to grow, I think we can play a big role in helping ensure that growth is managed sustainably and continues to offer those benefits I just mentioned.
Sophie, we are going to transition now into our last question for you, which we ask of all our guests, which comes down to a party fact. So let's say we are at a GSI-sponsored happy hour and there is all kinds of sustainably sourced salmon in front of us, from fillets with lemon, like you mentioned, to maybe even like salmon sashimi, sushi type stuff.
No shrimp cocktail, only salmon cocktails.
and salmon cocktails. Wow, what a party this is. So, Sophie, if we're talking with folks at this party and we want to take a fact that we learn about sustainable aquaculture and share that with other folks that we know that will help them internalize how important this topic is there one fact or one statistic that you would share with us that we can spread all over the world?
Just one. Well, also tucking into salmon sushi. What fact? I know. Do you know what? When you're eating that salmon sushi at that cocktail hour, I would probably say to the person next to you, did you know that aquaculture is the fastest growing food sector on the planet? That actually almost half of all the salmon we're eating is, farmed, and that number is just going to grow in years to come.
The fastest growing segment. That's pretty interesting.
I know, yeah.
And is it on pace to keep being the fastest?
Yeah, I'm not sure on the exact number actually, but I think it's set to grow kind of 5-10% year on year because, we're getting more people on the planet and more people are choosing seafood, which is great to see.
And do you find that the new entrants, are they already GSI members expanding their operations, or it's totally new companies that may or may not be part of GSI?
It's the industry as a whole. GSI members are growing and also non-GSI members as well. The whole industry is growing. Excellent.
Well, Sophie, what an awesome party fact to end on, which speaks to the success that you've had with GSI, and we wish it continues well into the future. So thank you again so much for joining us to talk all things sustainable aquaculture and about some of the best ways to prepare sustainable salmon. So again, thanks so much for joining us, and we look forward to seeing where GSI goes in the future.
Thank you so much for having me, and I hope you tuck into a delicious salmon dish for dinner tonight.
If you insist.
Thanks, Sophie.
Thanks, Sophie.
Thanks.
All right, Scott, like GSI's goal to eradicate all antibiotic use in farmed salmon, I think we're going to go ahead and have to eradicate this episode.
Ooh, we'll have to report on that annually, too. Okay. So, Jay, let's first thank the Global Salmon Initiative This was sponsored content, but this is the kind of thing that helps us keep the show going, Jay. Gives us those necessary revenues to pay for things that we need to run the show. And they were so good about no topic was really off limits. We touched on basically what we would have done even if it wasn't sponsored. So many thanks to them for being a great partner on this. We also want to ask you listeners, we're going to try something new for the December episode. You all, if you've been listening for a while, we do a holiday hodgepodge episode every December, do a variety of things, including holiday gift ideas that are sustainable. Well, one thing we want to try this year is hearing from you. We want to hear from you about what you've done in the past year, an action you've taken to be more sustainable, or something you're going to do in the next year, or how you've helped spread the word about sustainability. And there's a couple different ways you can tell us about your story. One is you can leave a voicemail for us on our Google Voice number, and that is 202-670-7357. That's 202-670-7357.
Congrats, you just got our digits, by the way.
Yeah. The audio on that is not as good as if you record it yourself and send to us. So the way to do that is on people who have iPhones. Go to the voice memo app, record whatever it is you want to record, and then email it to us at hosts, HOSTS, at SustainabilityDefined.com. And then for those who have Android, there is no preloaded app, at least that I could find on Google. I don't have an Android. But people can download the Easy Voice Recorder. That's what it's called, Easy Voice Recorder from Android's Play Store if they want. Again, record something about how you've been sustainable, how you're going to be sustainable in the new year, or how you've helped spread the word. We'll especially like it and almost certainly play it if it's saying how you heard something on the show and then acted as a result.
And includes a bad joke.
Oh, yes.
All right, Scott, let's keep wrapping this up and thank our usual suite of folks. We'd like to thank Square Peg, Round Hole, and Potions for the music we use in this episode, as well as Samantha Birch and Annabelle Mercer, who are helping us out with our marketing strategy, Matt Aarons for rocking social media.
He's
and
executing some of this strategy.
That's right. And Scott, of course, our rockstar researcher in the form of your mom, Adrienne Breen.
She's the
Always
best.
Thanks to her. And lastly, a reminder for all you folks that are still listening towards the tail end of this episode to rate, review, and subscribe. As incentive to do that, we will read yours aloud, like Eric B. Sustainable posted not too long ago. Eric said, I've been listening to Sustainability Defined for about a month when I was loading up on podcasts in preparation for my summer holiday. I always have high ambitions of educating myself during vacation periods, but typically my 2 children successfully prevent that from happening. I was able to listen to a few episodes which really hit home for me, and now I'm completely hooked. I listen on my 90 or so minutes a day driving to/from work, and am constantly annoying my family with party facts that I learn in the show. As a proud millennial, I feel sustainability is in my DNA, and I really enjoy getting to learn through your podcasts ways to make more informed decisions, help to educate others, and also influence my professional career as a side benefit. Keep up the good work and the jokes. Thanks, Eric B. Sustainable.
Eric B. Oh,
Eric be flattering is what he be.
I love how he's sharing party facts with his family. Like, hey, kids. I mean, that's the best.
I wonder how old his kids are and if they're actually like, Dad, that's a great party fact.
Yeah, as they drink their like high C. That's I guess what they're drinking.
Yeah,
at
their
parties
sparkling cider
at this point. All right, so Jay, I think that about does it. You all stay sustainable out there. I'm Scott Breen.
And I'm Jay Siegel. We will see you next time.